I'm really glad to be here tonight. Ronald Reagan is one of my favorite topics. And the reason why he is, most politicians, when they speak, they essentially are giving you talking points or something along those lines. When you listen to Ronald Reagan, and as I prepared for the day, I went back and watched a lot of his speeches over again. And what I realized, he's a teacher. He taught us about the principles of liberty and freedom. And so, while I might, if I go back and watch speeches given by some politicians, I don't learn a lot. I just kind of learn why they wanted me to vote for them, or what their platform was, or something like that. But when I listen to Ronald Reagan's speeches, I learn a lot more than that. I learn what America was about. I learn what our founders intended. I learn how the principles of liberty apply in a modern world. So to me, it's just a great, great topic, and I'm excited to be here. He was often referred to as the great communicator, and I would argue he's more the great persuader, the great reminder. And I mean, in a sense, he would remind us of truths that probably somewhere in the back of our minds we knew were true. But he brought them to our attention again. He was the great teacher. And he led by inspiring us and helping us, and we could see what was possible through the things he taught. But I will tell you that some people, when they call him the great communicator, meant it as a backhanded compliment. Now, when I say he was a great communicator, I do not mean that as a I mean, he was an awesome communicator. But there, I've talked to people who, that was their way of saying, yeah, but he could read a teleprompter, but he's not that bright. Okay, that was their thing. Now, I'll get to that in a minute, because that's a load of hooey. But the bottom line is, that's the other reason why I'm not always fond of that thing, that title, the great communicator, because to me, he was probably more the great persuader. But at any rate, let's move on. He one time addressed this, and I think it's very powerful what he said.
I want a nickname, the great communicator. But I never thought it was my style or the words I used that made a difference. It was the content. I wasn't a great communicator, but I communicated great things. And they didn't spring full bloom from my brow. They came from the heart of a great nation, from our experience, our wisdom, and our belief in the principles that have guided us for 2 centuries.
That's a pretty powerful message. It's not hard to be an effective communicator when you're communicating great things. They sometimes referred to Bill Clinton as he was good at teleprompter, could give a good speech. But if I were to ask you what were some of his great lines, we're going to watch a video in a few minutes. It's 15 minutes long. The challenge in making a 15-minute video about Ronald Reagan is trying to... I could have made a 4-hour movie on Ronald Reagan about just... And all of this is his words. It's not me talking about Ronald Reagan. It's just clips of Ronald Reagan. It would be to get down from the hours of deep, insightful truths that he talked about and give yourself 15 minutes. Okay, so what would Mr. Clinton's big lines be? I did not have, okay, that'd be one of them. The era of big government is over. Well, that was a lie. Right?
Depends on the meaning of is.
Depends on the meaning of is.
I feel your pain.
I feel your pain. Okay? There's no great content there. That's why it's forgettable. That's why he's not a great communicator, because to be a great communicator, you must communicate effectively, and you must communicate great things. And that's what Ronald Reagan did. He communicated great things. Interesting enough, though, he didn't say, I had great ideas, I was brilliant, and I had these wonderful deep thoughts, and I wanted to give them to you because I'm smart. He told us they weren't mine. They were yours. They were our nation's. It's our history. It's our shared experience, our wisdom, our beliefs. It was this history of the founding. So I appreciate that humility as well. Anyhow, I think that, to me, is powerful, and perhaps will help encapsulate what we talk about here tonight. So the other thing I like about Reagan is he understood this was important. Some people get into politics because it's a little bit like being a fan of a sports team. Now I will tell you, I'm an avid Redskin fan, okay? Really avid Redskin fan. And I joke with my kids, I mean, I've told all my daughters, when you introduce me to your intended, I'm going to ask them 3 questions. And one of them is, Redskins or Cowboys? Now, that's mostly in jest, because I understand the reality is I'm a Redskin fan because my parents lived here when I was born, and I was born and raised in the area, and I'm a Redskin fan. And had I been born and raised in Green Bay, I'd probably be a Green Bay Packers fan. Had I been born and raised in San Francisco, I'd be a San Francisco fan. Okay, so I get that. In other words, the point is, it's somewhat just random. This stuff's not random. Ronald Reagan, people ought not be Republicans because it's the club they belong to. It's the fan club they belong to. They ought to be Republicans for a very different reason. And it's what he talks about right here. Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We don't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. It must be fought for, protected, and handed on to them to do the same. Or one day, we will spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it was once like in the United States when men were free. Okay, so that means he gets it. This isn't vote to me because our club is cooler than their club. This isn't vote for me because our uniforms are better or our cheerleaders are hotter or whatever other stupid thing you can come up with. This is the reason. Because to be an American, we're not a race. It's an ideal. America's the only place in the world that's an idea. Okay? You want to be a Frenchman? You don't move to France to become a Frenchman. You will not become a Frenchman by moving to France. But most of our ancestors came to America because they wanted something, because they believed that all men were created equal. They were endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these were life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that animated them, and they came here, and that's what they believed, and that's why they were Americans. It didn't matter if their last name had an Owski on the end of it, or an Eni, or whatever, or a vowel at the end. The point was, what made you an American was a commitment to the concepts of the founding. So America is a place of ideas. It's the only place like that, and that's why we can lose it. France will always be France. 1,000 years from now, they can stop having great pastries and they can get rid of the Eiffel Tower, it'll still be France. Because it's a place. Now, I'll tell you, 1,000 years from now, America will not be America unless we remain true to the founding principle, because America is not a place. It's an idea. Ronald Reagan understood that. Well, as I told you, the mainstream media dismissed, and here you have Time Magazine. Why is this man so popular? Just, frustrated by it. You've got Slate Magazine using words like stupidity. You've got David Broder with the Washington Post talking about an arid desert between his ears. Clifford Clark, former Secretary of Defense under LBJ, referring to him as a dunce. You have all of this. All I can say is these people are stupid, and they didn't do their homework. It's really very easy to prove that Ronald Reagan was a bright and intelligent man. I occasionally will hear Republicans talk about he's a great leader, but that's not true. He communicated great ideas, and he was fluent in the principles of liberty, and he was fluent in the ideas of our founding. I should say real quickly here, this isn't really designed to be a lecture, so we will certainly have time at the end for questions if we don't have anyone who wants to interject during the presentation, and I'm okay with that too. But to be perfectly honest, we have a microphone here, and if something on the screen or something I've said strikes a chord with you and you want to make a comment or ask a question, I would ask maybe not to give alternative speeches, because I do have to end on time, and I don't want to have all my time taken up by someone giving an alternative speech. But definitely we want input, so this must be interactive. I probably should have said it to start off with. So please don't be intimidated by the fact there's a microphone here. Okay? It's supposed to be used. It was here for a reason. It's not just there as an ornament, and so you're welcome to. But if it seems daunting to get up in the middle of something and do it, then we can do it at the end. In which case, if we have to, we'll flog you to get questions out of you. Okay, just kidding about the flogging. Promise. Don't run for the doors. But at any rate, so this is how you know that this isn't true. My wife got me this wonderful book. My wife's back here, lovely lady here, third row from the back. And she knows of my love for Ronald Reagan, and she said to me, she got me this book, Reagan in His Own Hand. And what it is, people think of presidents having speechwriters, and so we think, oh yeah, well, he gave a lot of speeches, and people wrote his speeches for him. And it's true, it is in the White House, he did have some great speechwriters, people like Peggy Noonan and so forth. But he was actually giving political speeches for decades before he became president. And he was his own speechwriter. And how do we know that? Because we have legal pads. You know those yellow legal pads? He wrote them in his own handwriting, double-spaced them, and then he would go in and scribble things out and make his own edits to his own speeches. He would speak every single week, multiple times, going around for GE. speaking in different factories and so forth when he was a representative for GE. The point is, he thought about these things deeply. These weren't thoughts that some very intelligent person put in front of him and then he read effectively on a teleprompter. That may be how Bill Clinton did it. That may be how Barack Obama does it. That is not how Ronald Reagan did it. Okay? And if you've written, so anyhow, this is a great quote up here, but he was an intellectual powerhouse. So I'm offended when people act like he wasn't that smart, because it is not inappropriate to word the phrase intellectual powerhouse when you're talking about Ronald Reagan, his understanding of the American founding and the principles of the founding. I see a hand back here.
Yeah, I don't know if you remember this, but kind of a media thing that backfired was when he was in office and Saturday Night Live did a skit, and they had him like looking like a dunce and his cabinet around him, and as soon as the cameras went away, do you remember this?
I remember.
Yes, and he said, okay, you, and he started acting like he was in control and the rest of them were dunces. And it was supposed to be funny. They were supposed to be making fun of him, but it was really true.
Right.
He was the one in control. So they kind of backfired on that.
Right.
He got it.
Well, and I agree. Now, for those who may not be able to hear her, I'll just try to summarize quickly. She was referring to a Saturday Night Live skit in which they put on this whole skit of him in a cabinet meeting, and when the camera was on, he was kind of, probably falling asleep and not paying attention, and everyone else looked really on top of things, and he did surround himself with smart people, but he was unfortunately not up to their speed. And then when the camera would go away from him, all of a sudden he would jump into action and he would give directions and lead the cabinet in a way that just was impressive. And the answer is that was supposed to be a joke, but it was true. And how do we know this? Because members of his cabinet, the man has been dead now for a decade, basically. And people will come forward and say, yeah, I was the real brains behind the operation. How often do we see that happen? And yet that hasn't been the case. I know Ed Meese personally. I've talked to Ed Meese many times. Ed Meese believes in Ronald Reagan like you can't believe. Ed Meese never says, I was the real legal brains behind the operation. And I haven't heard other people say that. Certainly, what you hear is that this was a great man and a great leader. But if you ever read this book, you cannot read his speeches and come to the conclusion that this is not a bright man. You just can't. I'm sorry. Someone didn't write these for them. He wrote them in his own hand, hence the title of the book. So that's Exhibit A to anyone who's unwilling to accept the phrase intellectual powerhouse. Alrighty, so we're going to watch a tribute film now, and I just want a few things for you to watch through. It's about 15 minutes long. It's nobody talking about Ronald Reagan. It's just Ronald Reagan. And the challenge for me was to just, like I said, you can come to me afterwards and say, why didn't you include this? And the answer is because we couldn't be here till next Monday. But I want you to watch for some things, okay? Don't just be entertained. Watch about how he talks about freedom and opportunity, how he talks about opposing evil. Look at how he deals with values, things like family and faith. Look at his historical perspective of the Constitution, American exceptionalism. His understanding of American exceptionalism was profound. I mean, it was like he was a PhD type person when it comes to understanding that. There are people who think that American exceptionalism is thinking that America is better than every place else and that we're better. One time, Mr. Obama was asked, do you believe in American exceptionalism? He says, of course I do. I believe in American exceptionalism just like the Greeks believe in Greek exceptionalism. Well, let me tell you something. Greeks don't believe in Greek exceptionalism. They simply don't. Now, they may have national pride, and they may think, they once had a great culture, and they may think it's a cool place to live and a nice place to vacation, but they do not believe that they have any special mission in the world, or that anything like that. And American exceptionalism isn't that Americans are better, or that the soil in America is better, or that our DNA is superior. It's about the role that America plays in the world. It's about the principles of liberty and freedom and the difference that makes. There's a reason why America is the primary innovator in the world. Most all the patents in the world happen here. Is that because Americans are smarter? I don't think so.
Nobel Prizes, too.
Yeah, Nobel Prizes, too. And the reason for this is simply we have a society that encourages innovation, encourages creativity. That's what freedom does. Freedom unleashes the human mind. And so that's what he understood. He understood that what makes America special is the role that it plays and the rules that we've created for our society. And if we want to continue to have that be the case, we need to make sure that we're willing to understand that. But it's not nationalism. American exceptionalism is that, we're better than everybody else. all those other countries are losers. It's not that. It's this sense of understanding what America's about and why it's a special place. Anyhow, listen to his tone, how positive, optimistic he is. Listen to how he uses humor. When he's critical of sometimes his opponents, look how he uses humor to do it rather than just calling them names or being mean. It's a very interesting kind of way of doing this. And then I really like his humility. You saw an evidence of his humility when he talked about how he wasn't a great communicator. He only communicated great things, and they weren't even his things. They were somebody else's. He was basically saying, I'm just a plagiarizer. I mean, the humility of all of that. He's not a me guy. He doesn't get up and give you a speech about how awesome he is. He's giving you a speech about how awesome America is. And I really love that. So those are some things I want you to watch for. The other thing I want you to do is listen to how timeless the things he says are. You will hear things that he said in the late 50s, the early 60s, the 70s, and the 80s. And if you didn't know better, you would think that he cut these tapes this morning to address issues that our nation is facing today. And I think that's impressive. Try doing that with someone like Bill Clinton. Take his stuff, listen to it 30 or 40 years later, and you just kind of roll your eyes and say, why were we even interested in this claptrap? But at any rate, so you move on. He spoke clearly, plainly. He also spoke eloquently. And then finally, of course, he spoke aspirationally. He encourages us to aim higher. I really like the tone that he always took. He never believed that we had to follow him. He viewed it as his obligation to encourage us and give us the reason to follow him. It was an entreating, invitational sort of thing. And so the pressure was on him. He would get on television in the evening, to discuss America, what we needed to do. And it wasn't, I'm president, you got to do what I think we need to do. It was, we have a problem here, let's solve it. This is how we think we need to solve it. And with the sheer power of his ideas, he convinced us he was right, and then we coalesced around him. I love that, because it's based in freedom. He respected us as citizens, as sovereign citizens. We weren't obligated to do what he told us to do, but we were obligated by the power of ideas to believe in a better future. And so to me, that's powerful. So with that, let's watch, and I guess we can probably turn on the lights if we want. That might be good.
It is time for us to realize that we're too great a nation to limit ourselves to small dreams. We're not, as some would have us believe, doomed to an inevitable decline. I do not believe in a fate that will fall on us no matter what we do. I do believe in a fate that will fall on us if we do nothing. Those who say that we're in a time when there are no heroes, they just don't know where to look. You can see heroes every day going in and out of factory gates. Others, a handful in number, produce enough food to feed all of us and then the world beyond. You meet heroes across a counter, and they're on both sides of that counter. There are entrepreneurs with faith in themselves and faith in an idea who create new jobs, new wealth, and opportunity. They're individuals and families who take taxes, support the government, and whose voluntary gifts support church, charity, culture, art, and education. Their patriotism is quiet but deep. Their values sustain our national life. But I remember the story of a fellow who was running for office as a Republican, and he was in a rural area and it wasn't known to be Republican, and he stopped by a farm to do some campaigning, and when the farmer heard he was a Republican, his jaw dropped and he said, "Wait right here till I go get Ma. She's never seen a Republican before." So he got her, and the candidate looked around for a podium from which to give his speech, and the only thing he could find was a pile of that stuff that Bess Truman took 35 years trying to get Harry to call fertilizer. So he got up on the mound, and when they came back, he gave his speech. And at the end of it, the farmer said, "That's the first time I ever heard a Republican speech." And the candidate said, "That's the first time I've ever given a Republican speech from a Democratic platform."
The trouble with our liberal friends is not that they're ignorant. It's just that they know so much that isn't so. Now, For 3 decades, we've sought to solve the problems of unemployment through government planning, and the more the plans fail, the more the planners plan. We have so many people who can't see a fat man standing beside a thin one without coming to the conclusion the fat man got that way by taking advantage of the thin one. That no one in this country should be denied medical care because of a lack of funds. But I think we're against forcing all citizens, regardless of need, into a compulsory government program. No government ever voluntarily reduces itself in size. So government programs, once launched, never disappear. Actually, a government bureau is the nearest thing to eternal life we'll ever see on this earth. They told us they have a utopian solution of peace without victory. They call their policy accommodation. And they say if we'll only avoid any direct confrontation with the enemy, he'll forget his evil ways and learn to love us. But every lesson of history tells us that the greater risk lies in appeasement. And this is the specter our well-meaning liberal friends refuse to face, that their policy of accommodation is appeasement. And it gives no choice between peace and war, only between fight or surrender. You and I have a rendezvous with destiny. We'll preserve for our children this, the last best hope of man on earth, or we'll sentence them to take the last step into 1,000 years of darkness. The United States of America is unique in world history because it has a genius for leaders, many leaders on many levels. But back in 1976, Mr. Carter said, "Trust me." And a lot of people did. And now many of those people are out of work. Many have seen their savings eaten away by inflation. And today, a great many who trusted Mr. Carter wonder if we can survive the Carter policies of national defense. Trust Me government asks that we concentrate our hopes and dreams on one man, that we trust him to do what's best for us. Well, my view of government places trust not in one person or one party, but in those values that transcend persons and parties.
And I would like to lead that crusade with your help, and it would be one to take government off the backs of the great people of this country and turn you loose again to do those things that I know you can do so well because you did them and made this country great.
Is there any doubt in your mind that you would be able to function in such circumstances?
Not at all, Mr. Truitt, and I want you to know that also I will not make age an issue of this campaign. I am not going to exploit for political purposes my opponent's youth and inexperience.
Let us begin an era of national renewal. Let us renew our determination, our courage, and our strength. And let us renew our faith and our hope. I did not take the oath I've just taken with the intention of presiding over the dissolution of the world's strongest economy. In the days ahead, I will propose removing the roadblocks that have slowed our economy and reduced productivity. In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
About a fellow who went to the KGB to report that he lost his parrot. The KGB asked him why he was bothering them. Why didn't he just report it to the local police? Well, he answered, "I just want you to know that I don't agree with a thing my parrot has to say." We'll note the law's description of pirates, hostis humanis, the enemies of all mankind. There can be no place on earth left where it is safe for these monsters to rest or train or practice their cruel and deadly skills. We must act together, or unilaterally if necessary, to ensure that terrorists have no sanctuary anywhere. Letter came from Peter Sweeney. He's in the 2nd grade in the Riverside School in Rockville Center. And he said, "I hope you get well quick, or you might have to make a speech in your pajamas." All we need to begin with is a dream that we can do better than before. All we need to have is faith, and that dream will come true. All we need to do is act, and the time for action is now. Thank you. The story was an American and a Russian arguing about their two countries, and the American said, look, in my country, I can walk into the Oval Office, I can pound the president's desk and say, Mr. President, I don't like the way you're running our country. And the Russian said, I can do that. The American said, you can? He says, yes. I can go into the Kremlin, to the General Secretary's office, pound his desk and say, Mr. General Secretary, I don't like the way President Reagan's running his country. What I'm describing now is a plan and a hope for the long term. The march of freedom and democracy, which will leave Marxism, Leninism on the ash heap of history as it has left other tyrannies which stifle the freedom and muzzle the self-expression of the people. Well, I believe there's a better way of eliminating the threat of nuclear war. It is a strategic defense initiative aimed ultimately at finding a non-nuclear defense against ballistic missiles. It's the most hopeful possibility of the nuclear age, but it's not very well understood. Some say it will bring war to the heavens, but its purpose is to deter war in the heavens and on Earth. Now, some say the research would be expensive, perhaps, but it could save millions of lives, indeed humanity itself. And some say if we build such a system, the Soviets will build a defense system of their own. Well, they already have strategic defenses that surpass ours, a civil defense system where we have almost none, and a research program covering roughly the same areas of technology that we're now exploring. And finally, some say the research will take a long time. Well, the answer to that is, let's get started. Today is a day for mourning and remembering. Nancy and I are pained to the core by the tragedy of the Shuttle Challenger. We know we share this pain with all of the people of our country. And I want to say something to the school children of America who are watching the live coverage of the shuttle's takeoff. I know it's hard to understand, but sometimes painful things like this happen. It's all part of the process of exploration and discovery. It's all part of taking a chance at expanding man's horizons. The future doesn't belong to the faint-hearted. It belongs to the brave. The Challenger crew was pulling us into the future, and we'll continue to follow them. The crew of the Space Shuttle Challenger honored us for the manner in which they lived their lives. We will never forget them, nor the last time we saw them this morning, as they prepared for their journey and waved goodbye, and slipped the surly bonds of Earth to touch the face of God. While we Americans detest war, we love freedom and stand ready to sacrifice for it. We love freedom not only because it's practical and beneficial, but because it is morally right and just. In advancing freedom, we Americans carry a special burden, a belief in the dignity of man in the sight of the God who gave birth to this country. General Secretary Gorbachev, if you seek peace, if you seek prosperity for the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, if you seek liberalization, come here to this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. I've spoken of the shining city all my political life, but in my mind it was a tall, proud city built on rocks stronger than oceans, windswept, God-blessed, and teeming with people of all kinds living in harmony and peace. A city with free ports that hummed with commerce and creativity. That's how I saw it and see it still. And how stands the city on this winter night? More prosperous, more secure, and happier than it was 8 years ago. But more than that, after 200 years, 2 centuries, she still stands strong and true on the granite ridge, and her glow is held steady, no matter what storm. And she's still a beacon for all who must have freedom, for all the pilgrims from all the lost places who are hurtling through the darkness toward home. We've done our part. And as I walk off into the city streets, a final word to the men and women who for 8 years did the work that brought America back. My friends, we did it. We weren't just marking time. We made a difference. We made the city stronger. We made the city freer. And we left it in good hands. All in all, not bad. Not bad at all. And so, goodbye. God bless you. And God bless the United States of America.
God bless you, Landrith.
They say there's a place where dreams have all gone and never said when, but I think I know it's miles through the night, just over the dawn, on the road that will take me home.
It is time for us to realize that we're too great a nation to limit ourselves to small dreams. We have every right to dream heroic dreams. And after all, why shouldn't we believe that? We are Americans. God bless you and thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, I always love how at the end, if you watch closely, oh yeah, I got the microphone. I always love how if you watch closely, it's not on? Oh, I turned it off. There, now it's on. I always love how if you watch closely there, you can see the emotion in his lips as he concludes that speech. But at any rate, what I love about those things we've seen is that he was fluent in the language of freedom. He understood down to his core, it was imprinted on his DNA, the principles that make America work. And he didn't recite talking points. You could tell this was stuff he knew in his heart. And he was simply sharing the things that he knew. And he explained what needed to be done. Did you see how in the State of the Union address we talked about missile defense? It wasn't just a list of something that he said, I'm going to put this on your and I want you to pass it. That's how most of those stupid addresses look now. The president stands up, tells people how to vote, and demands they pass his bill. He didn't do that. He never once said, you must pass this bill. What did he do? He explained to them why it was needed. He gave them the arguments, pro and con, and explained to the public. And as a result, of course, we're freer and safer today because we have those kinds of things. But that's the amazing power of being a persuader. Because in a free society where the people are sovereign, he's not the king. He can't tell me what to do. He can't tell me what to believe. But what he can do is win my heart with truth. And he understood that. And that's why he was a great leader. But so that's one of the things I really liked about his leadership style if you look at kind of what he did. Now, of course, freedom works and it provides awesome results. If you want to, they will tell people who look at processes in business understand that you have to change things to get different results. You can't just kind of hope for different results. And I think our founders understood that. So when they created this country, they built it on a number of things. They built it on the principle of the people are sovereign. Okay, so that means that you and I are in charge. That was designed to essentially, if you will, democratize power. Political power was in the hands of the people. And the free market does the same thing. except it puts the economic power in the hands of the people. And we often, in politics today, people talk about how you listen to Bernie Sanders talk and you'd think that you know, the big corporations are so much more powerful than we are. Interesting enough, you know what? ExxonMobil, as big as it is, can't make me buy any gas from them. And they can't make you buy any gas from them. And if we all chose not to buy gas from them, they'd go out of business in a short order. Because the beauty of the free market system is that we actually are also, just like in democracy, sovereign. Now you could say, well, I'm just one person in a political system. I don't get to decide who president is. Well, that's true. I understand. Just one of us doesn't. But collectively we do, and the same thing in the marketplace. I may not by myself be able to force a corporation in any one direction, but we do collectively. So it's the same principle. The marketplace is designed to maximize individual freedom. And the system of limited government, where the people are sovereign, is designed to give us maximum freedom. I think that's important. And he knew all of this. This wasn't something that he needed someone like me or one of his speechwriters to explain. He knew all of this. So when someone gave him a speech, if it had a mistake in it or something he felt sent the wrong message, he was absolutely, in a heartbeat, could pull out his pen just like he'd done so many times before, make a few edits, correct it, and be teaching Americans the truth. I think that's important. Of course, it promotes national security, which is important, obviously. There's a world full of people who hate us and want to do harm to us, and we need to have a strong defense. He understood that as well. He wasn't afraid to confront evil, because he understood there was evil. When you're a moral relativist, it's hard to confront evil. When you understand that there's evil and you can accept that, then it's not really that big a deal to confront it. And he was willing to. Our current president seems not willing to confront evil. There's times where he is much more willing to call names to his political adversaries here in the United States than he is terrorists. I mean, his most of the time he uses the word terrorist, he's referring to the Republicans in Congress. He's not referring to ISIS most of the time. You can check it out, Google it. I mean, it's very frustrating. And you watch him when he's angry, when his peak is up and you can see fire in his eyes. I know what he's talking about. He's either talking about Americans who aren't with him or he's talking about a Congress that's not with him. He's not talking about ISIS. He's not talking about Putin. He's not talking about Kim Jong-un. He's not talking about the mullahs in Iran. He's talking about us. That's what makes him upset. That's, to me, very discouraging. So anyhow, but that I think, though, is the genius of a Reagan, is he respected us. And so he talked to us like he respected us. Well, the other thing he did is he inspired. I have a theory of leadership. I know that some people think leadership is commanding people and telling them what to do and ordering them about and speaking in a gruff tone and then they go do it. And maybe I'm wrong on this, but I think, you know, it's hard for me to imagine what it's like to be a president necessarily, but I can imagine what it's like to be a scoutmaster. I've been a scoutmaster for many, many years of my life. I've got 7 boys, 2 of them are here. Jefferson, who's already an Eagle Scout, and CJ, who will be an Eagle Scout in the very near future. All my other boys are Eagles as well. I learned my interest in scouting from my mother, who's also here, by the way. She's right behind my attractive wife. She's the other attractive blonde right here. But you can say that about your mother, right? Particularly in front of your wife. I don't generally compliment attractive blondes, you know, because it's, you know. But my wife never gets upset when I refer to my mom as an attractive blonde. So anyhow, but the bottom line is, let's say I'm on a hike. All these boys are tired. They've got backpacks on. We're going up a mountain, and it's tiring. I can kind of get behind and kick them in the rear end and say, come on, let's get going. Stop being a wimp. Pick up your pack. We got to move. I'm not sure that's leadership. That's just pulling rank on them and saying, you know, you got to do it because I'm bigger than you or something. I think leadership is probably finding a clearing in the woods and pointing up the mountain peak we're climbing and point it out to them and talk about what we're going to see on the way. Let them know that we're going to see some fantastic things. We're going to experience some great things. We're going to see some of the most awesome things that God's created. But in order to do that, we've got to put our backs on and make up this hill. And let them know it'll be worth it, even though it'll be hard. I think that's leadership. And that's what Ronald Reagan did. He didn't order us about. He wasn't a ruler. He governed. And there's a difference between ruling and governing. And I want to hear your comment, but what I want to ask you to do is have someone pass the mic to him, because then I won't repeat what you say nearly as effectively as you say it.
I was reading a book by Bill O'Reilly about killing Reagan, and one of the stories, this relates to me because I was in the FAA. I've been in the FAA 25 years, and Reagan expressed, or Reagan showed true leadership when he fired the air traffic controllers. He gave them an ultimatum, and I think he needed to stand up to the Soviets at that time. And this is his way of kind of showing great leadership, deciding to let them go at.
That's a very interesting point. One of the things that, I'm glad you brought that up, because after the Soviet Union fell, they asked a former member of the Politburo Bureau. He was speaking at Harvard University. I forget his name now. But he spoke at Harvard, and he was asked, kind of, at what point did you realize that Reagan was going to be a pretty, a pretty effective adversary? When did you realize that you had all you could handle? And he said there was two things, really, that were very, very powerful that most Americans didn't understand. And one of them was that. You wouldn't think, but he said, when he fired the FAA people, that he said he'd have to if they didn't follow the law, we knew we had someone who would do something that was even politically difficult and perhaps unpopular. And he said the other thing was, when he referred to us as the evil empire, he says in the Pravda we joked about it, the Pravda covered it and laughed at it like it was silly. And he says, you know what? We all knew in our heart of hearts he was right. And he says, it crushed us. That's the power of truth. Even the communists understood he was right. So anyhow, so he was optimistic but realistic. So, if I point through the mountains and I point out to a mountain that's 350 miles away and I tell the boys we got to get there by evening time, that's not good leadership because they know that's not possible. But you can lead people to great things. Leaders also focus on the follower, if you will, the person that's following them, not on themselves. And I think you see Reagan doing that as well. I didn't hear a lot of talk there about him. He may reference himself occasionally, like people say I'm a great communicator, but then he turns it back and says, but it's not me, right? Someone asked him a question about him, and he turned the conversation back to America, its ideals, the things it believes, its history, its traditions, its wisdom. So to me, that again is a sign of a leader, and I'm impressed by it. We can learn so much of this. Of course, he spoke to lead and encourage. He didn't really tell us what we wanted to hear. He told us what we needed to hear. Now, maybe some of us wanted to hear what he had to say because we understood it and hungered for it. But much of America didn't. And much of America didn't agree with him initially. But he built consensus by speaking truth effectively and persuading.
And whatever else history may say about me when I'm gone, I hope it will record that I appealed to your best hopes, not your worst fears, to your confidence rather than your doubts.
And that's another thing I love about the man. His optimism, his just approach to life. There's a power in that optimism. Eeyore, I'm a father of 7 children, so forgive me for citing Eeyore, but Eeyore and Winnie the Pooh, 2 great things I learned from Winnie the Pooh. One is the great statement that Winnie the Pooh makes, the more I looked, the more it wasn't there. And once you understand that actually makes perfect sense when you're thinking about the things that sometimes liberals say, then you realize that Winnie the Pooh is actually very smart. The other thing, of course, is that Eeyore isn't going to make things happen because Eeyore is convinced that everything's never going to work out. So while it's okay to have your down day every now and then, the reality is if we're going to get things happening and working well, we have to be an optimist because you have to see the possibilities to get to the next level. Anyhow, I also think it's important. Reagan understood why he was a conservative. There was never a time that he was misunderstanding the reason he was conservative. It wasn't because it was popular, because sometimes it's not. And it certainly wasn't because it's easy. I will tell you, it's much easier to be a liberal. Much, much easier. Because if you're a liberal, you can say things like, I think everybody should have free health care. Yay! That's so easy. It just, you hear Bernie Sanders say all the time, everyone goes gaga over that stuff. It's easy to explain that. It's much harder to explain why that's actually ineffective and why it guarantees that people will get poor health care, and it will be very expensive poor health care. And then you have to understand economics, and you have to understand all kinds of things to explain why the free market would work better. So to be a conservative is hard work. It's like, for parents, you can all understand that anyone's been a parent and raised a teenager. It's easy to be a teenager's friend. because you tell them what they want to hear, you let them have what they want to have, and they like you and they're happy, right? Except for my boys because they're very mature. But they like it when I don't let them have what they want because they're just so mature. What's hard is being a parent sometimes and saying, no, that's not how we do it. And the reason it's harder is because you have to explain things in the long run, and it's not always easy, and people don't like it. And I would say that's, politically, the grown-ups in the room are the conservatives. And politically, the people who just want to be your buddy, your friend, but not a true friend, just kind of like your playmate, those are the liberals. They'll just tell you whatever it is they think they want to hear. He understood that. So don't be a conservative because it's easy. Don't be it because it's fun. Don't even be a liberal because you want to, don't be a conservative because you want to stop liberals from taking your stuff. That's fine. I'll tell you why Ronald Reagan was a conservative. It was this, because he believed that the founding principles of our nation provide the most freedom and opportunity and well-being to everyone. Now that certainly does involve people not taking your stuff, but that wasn't the real reason. That was just kind of like a side benefit. The truth of the matter is the rich can afford big government. It's the rest of us who can't. Think about it. Bill Gates, you could take half of everything he owns. You could confiscate it. He would still have the biggest house, and he'd still be one of the most wealthy men in the world. But you do that to a single mom who's working 2 jobs to support her family and trying to get her young children perhaps ahead so that they'll have a better life than right now she's feeling like she's providing them? That's devastating. So if you're rich, maybe it's easy to say, well, big government's okay, I can afford it. But for the rest of us, big government is devastating. And he understood that. That's why he was a conservative. It wasn't because it was the cool club. It wasn't because the cheerleaders were the best. It was because it's what made people happier, freer, more secure. And that's what he was about. And that's what we should be about. And I also think sometimes when we fall in the trap of acting like we're upset because government wastes too much money and that's the only reason we're conservatives is to stop waste, I think stopping waste is great. But it falls in the trap, though, that the media tells about us, which is that we're greedy. And we don't, I always find it odd. Why is it we're greedy? You want more of my money, and because I am upset that you're wasting it, I'm the greedy one. But you're the one always reaching into my pocket. It's like the pickpocketer. When he reaches in your pocket, and you grab his hand, and then he says, stop being greedy. That's the way it goes. But the bottom line is it does fall in their trap. They like to call us greedy. So let's not focus so much on whether or not it's wasteful. Let's talk about why we are conservative. We don't want to waste. The reason why we don't want to waste money is because we understand the principles. If I waste money, I've just taken it from you. You can't put it to productive use, and now I'm going to squander it on something stupid. And I've taken opportunity from this man. I've taken freedom from this man. I've robbed him to some potential of his future, perhaps his children's future, because he's saving for college. That's why waste is bad, right? And I think we sometimes have to explain it better. Ronald Reagan always knew how to explain it. So anyhow, of course, it doesn't matter the issue. I'll give you a quick story on minimum wage. It's easy to say minimum wage should be higher, right? Because we all want people to make more money. Heck, I wish the minimum wage were $100 an hour. That'd be awesome, right? But the problem is, it just makes people unemployed. And Ronald Reagan understood this. I'll give you a quick story in my own life. My grandfather was the youngest of 6 children. His dad died when he was 2. And they were a poor family. And he got his first job at a young age, probably an age that would be criminal by today's standards. He was still in elementary school. His job was to deliver water around to construction workers. And they didn't pay him very much, but it was worth it if you're not paying him much to not have the workers who you're paying more to, get off the job for a minute and go get water. So instead, he brought the water to them, and that kept them, and it was economically feasible, right? So he's making like a quarter a week or something that's completely immoral and wrong, and by today's standards, that's what it would be. But the story ends. My grandfather's 25. He owns this company. He owns this company. I repeat, just in case you didn't hear that. It wasn't a McJob. He was delivering water. Worse than a McJob. And he owned the company. When I ran for Congress one time, one of my biggest supporters was an immigrant, legal immigrant to the United States. His first job in the U.S. was flipping burgers. It was a McJob. When he was one of my biggest supporters, you want to know what his job was? He owned 25 McDonald's. Okay, that's what opportunity is about. But the bottom line is, the economy is like a ladder. And ladders work best if the rungs start low. If the first rung on the ladder is up here, then unless you're Abdul-Jabbar, Or Shaq O'Neal, that ladder doesn't do any good. And my grandfather, in his circumstances, he wasn't that tall. He's actually a big man and tall, but in the metaphor that I'm using, he needed the rung to be low. And the rung was low enough that he could get on that ladder and climb up it. And one day he was at the top of the ladder. But that was because the minimum wage just raises up that first rung, so it makes it difficult is all I'm getting at. I'm all over people making lots of money. I think that's awesome. That's what America's about. I mean, my wife's grandfather, wonderful story. The son of immigrants from Greece. He comes to America. He basically has a high school education. He drives a bread truck for his living as an adult. That's what he delivers bread. Okay? He retires and when we were, he's passed away, of course, but when we were newlyweds, we'd go visit. He lived on a bluff overlooking the Pacific Ocean in San Clemente, California. Okay? That's where President Nixon retired to. I don't think his view was as good. This was a man who drove a bread truck. This is America. This is what America's about. Because in America, that can happen. When I was in Italy, I knew a man who was a world-renowned doctor. And he had a nice view of the Adriatic Ocean in his town called Pescara. In an apartment building. In an apartment building. Again, in an apartment building. A world-renowned doctor. My grandfather on my wife's side was a bread truck delivery man, and he owned what Italians would call a villa overlooking the Pacific Ocean. That's America. And that's why these things matter, because you have to have that. It doesn't happen other places. One of the things I liked about, of course, economic, we've kind of already talked about this, but you look what he did. What I loved was, they used to call it Reaganomics to make fun of it. And then it started working, and he said to one of his friends, have you noticed they don't call it Reaganomics anymore? Because they didn't want to give him credit anymore. They found other names, so trickle down or something else, but don't call it Reaganomics. I just a question here. Anyone? Do we still call it Obamacare, or we stopped calling it Obamacare? What does that tell you, that we still call it Obamacare?
We want him to get the credit.
That we want him to get the credit.
The blame.
The blame, exactly. So I think that's instructive. I've got a question here.
I have a question. Was it the George Bush Sr. who referred to Reagan's policy as voodoo economics?
It was. Yeah. That was in the primary when they were running against each other. And, George Bush became his vice president. And to his credit, I think became a loyal vice president. And I don't know that he was initially on board economically. And I don't believe that in that primary process he was the champion, for example, in the sanctity of life that Ronald Reagan was. But he did learn and grow, thankfully. But interestingly enough, he won his term because people believed him to be the third term of Ronald Reagan. And I think when they concluded that maybe he wasn't is when he didn't get his fourth term. But having said that, what you said was true. All right. Defending America. Now this picture here I'm kind of particularly fond of. This here is my former boss. That's Senator Malcolm Wallop. He is actually the father of American missile defense ideas in America. He was a friend of Ronald Reagan's, and at Paul Laxalt's ranch in the mid-'70s sat down and talked with me, talked about missile defense. Malcolm Wallop was very bright. He went to Yale. He's from Wyoming, but he went to Yale. And he did. I'm sorry. That's why he's my boss. He started. Thank you, Andrea. Malcolm Wallop, when he retired from the U.S. Senate, started Frontiers of Freedom. He was my boss. He was the chairman of the board until his passing a few years ago. And he hired me, and I'm a big fan of his. But anyhow, he sat down at a breakfast, casual breakfast at Paul Laxalt's ranch with me, Paul, and Ronald Reagan back in the 70s. And he explained to him missile defense. And he said Ronald Reagan immediately understood it. He says, and I was just talking to him over breakfast. I says, I've gone into people with engineering degrees, and I've had charts and all kinds of information, and I explained it to them. They just looked at me like, yeah, I think mutually assured destruction works fine. What missile defense? Sounds like a lot of, you can't hit a bullet with a bullet. Well, actually you can. It's just simple geometry. Now, you and I might not do it because we can't pull our thing out fast, our gun fast enough and aim it. But the truth is, if you hook up guns to computers, and they, they can track each other, you can hit it 100% of the time because it's actually all very predictable. Missiles are a little bit harder because they have the ability to move a little bit more, whereas a bullet just goes and has a predictable decline rate. But the reality is, we do it today. Don't tell me we can't do it. I mean, it's like telling you can't fly. Let's see, Wright Brothers, Dulles Airport, land on the moon. You can't do that. Well, I think you can do that which has been done. So that argument's over, is my point. Ronald Reagan wins that argument. All the people who said you can't do it, they were the dummies. And Mr. Reagan was the smart guy. But my boss was a friend of his and a political ally. And just so you know, and I'm a big fan of Margaret Thatcher, but even she wasn't supportive of missile defense initially. She thought it sounded like it was just way too much, not a good idea, would cost too much, and perhaps weaken the ability of the United States to defend itself and the rest of the world. But he stood his ground and he won, and today we're safer as a result of it. So, to me, these are important principles. Here's the wisdom. I love this sentence, because in one sentence he describes what defense is all about. History teaches us that wars begin when governments believe the price of aggression is cheap. In other words, it's simply economics. If a dozen donuts is $1, you'll buy a lot of them. If a dozen donuts cost $100,000, you won't buy very many. If aggression looks like it's on sale this week, you'll buy more if you're a dictator. If Putin looks at aggression and says, hey, price is cheap this week, Barack Obama's selling it cheap, then you will. And if they look around and say, looks like me, Ronald Reagan's upped the price on aggression, I guess I won't be buying it this week. I'll go buy something else. That's how it works. I mean, just brilliant. In one sentence. That's what I love. But anyhow. So another thing I like is peace through strength. He always talked about peace through strength. He didn't say peace through military strength because he understood it was more than that. He actually understood that was an important component. But we had to be economically strong. We had to be morally strong. He believed that all of that was important. So he didn't just focus on the military. That was an important part of it, because you can't necessarily pray yourself to safety either. But he understood that our moral fiber combined with our economic strength, combined with a military that was properly trained, funded, armed, with, that we'd be unstoppable. He understood that. And again, this is the guy that wasn't, this is the guy with the desert between the ears, right? That's what David Broder says for the Washington Post. Yeah. All right. Now, this is, again, I think, something that's important. He always prayed privately before cabinet meetings. That's why I think it's always appropriate we begin this meeting with prayer, even though it's not really a church function. Ronald Reagan, before he went to a cabinet meeting, he would step off into a side office and have a personal prayer on his own. And occasionally he was late because his prayer took too long. And he'd excuse himself for being a minute or two late. But, because unlike Mr. Clinton, he wasn't chronically late. He was rarely late. But anyhow, this is...
But it is our spiritual commitment, more than all the military might in the world, that will win our struggle for peace. It is not bombs and rockets, but belief and resolve. It is humility before God that is ultimately the source of America's strength as a nation.
Well, I think that's pretty powerful. There's not much I can say other than say, wow, when was the last time we had a president who talked like that? And again, that's a truth. To me, that's just a truth. It may not be politically correct, but it's a truth. Now, I love this humility. He had this sign on his desk where there is no limit to what a man can do or where he can go if he doesn't mind who gets the credit. And that's how Ronald Reagan was. That's why his speeches weren't about me and about I. When you listen to Mr. Obama speak, he's constantly telling us what a great president he's been, how successful he's been, how we're so respected in the world, how the economy is just humming along, how we have been how he saved us from the brink. Me thinketh he doth protest too much. Anyhow, Reagan didn't seek praise. When he did talk about what had been accomplished, he turned and gave the credit to the American people, its principles, and to God. He saw himself and he acted as if he were a servant to the people. That's how he treated us. You look at, this was a man who didn't walk in the room and say, I'm the president, I'm in charge here. He walked into the room, and his attitude was, I need to convince you because you are free, sovereign people. And then he did. And of course, I love what Mother Teresa said about him. A little picture of her over here. When I say little, you can see Nancy Reagan wasn't a particularly tall or big woman, and Mother Teresa's tiny. But anyhow, in this man, greatness and simplicity are one. I like that. Well, he led a great revolution, as you know. His vision and leadership transformed America on so many different levels. It was economics, it was military, it renewed our moral fiber as a nation. And what was interesting was he wasn't preaching to us all the time. I mean, he wasn't like the pastor-in-chief, but he created an environment in which we could, again, is that great quote we just listened to, turn our thoughts to some of the more weightier matters of the world. And I think that's important. He renewed our faith and hope and optimism, and we became proud to be Americans again. I have a friend who used to be a pilot for American Airlines, and he told me that he used to fly to Europe all the time. And when Carter was president, he said everybody was incredibly disrespectful of America and Americans. It was amazing. He said almost overnight, once Ronald Reagan was elected, people treated America in a different tone, in a different way. So it's funny how the local, here, what we hear is, he's just a cowboy, he's not respected internationally. And he said, that's not what I experienced when I got on a plane and flew to foreign airports. So Americans were proud and the rest of the world took notice. But I think what's interesting is he was the President of the United States, and yet his influence was felt across the globe. It didn't just stop here. He was ridiculed when he called the Soviets the evil empire. There were people who actually said it was irresponsible of him to say that. He stood in front of the great symbol of Soviet repression, that Berlin Wall. That's the Brandenburg Gate there, where he told him to open the gate, and then he said tear down the wall, because opening the gate wasn't quite enough. Yes, sir.
Could you confirm or disconfirm the story that the speech at the Brandenburg Gate, Reagan kept putting Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall, and the speechwriters and the State Department kept taking it out, and he kept writing it back in, and then at the final written copy did not have it in, and he went ahead with his words.
That is exactly true. That is exactly true. All of the diplomats and all of the speechwriters kept saying that can't be in there. That's too provocative. You've got to pull that out. And his attitude was, it's the truth. And just like with the evil empire, truth is powerful. It has an impact. He, for example, I don't know if you remember, he called Gaddafi the mad dog of the Middle East. He picked those words carefully. To Americans, it sounds kind of silly, kind of cartoonish. But in the Middle East, it was a tremendous sign of contempt and disrespect. And the message was not to Americans. It was to the international community, which was, I don't respect this man. He's a punk. And, but he did it in a way that was effective. He understood the power of words. And truth is powerful. People don't realize that sometimes. They think it's just words. Lies are just words. Truth is truth. At any rate, people found courage and hope in what he said, and they tore down that wall in just a few short years. And Soviet communism collapsed. Now, I want you guys to understand something. I know that now we look back on it and we think all of this is normal. I can remember the day I was driving into work, and I heard on the radio that the Berlin Wall was being torn apart. I remember that very well. And I will tell you, I did not, if you'd asked me the evening before if I thought that was likely to happen, I would have laughed at you and said, probably not in my lifetime. But it certainly wouldn't be happening in the next 24 hours. It would not be happening in the next year or two or even the next decade. It happened. If my wife had asked me that morning before I left, dear, what do you think will happen to the Berlin Wall today? I would have thought she was asking me a silly and stupid question. And I suspect that anyone who's being honest will admit that. These things happened in a way that, the conventional wisdom, CW, is that appeasement was the way to deal with communists. Today, it's accepted Ronald Reagan did it right, but you have to remember what he was up against. In the 70s and the early 80s, the idea was appeasement was the way to go. The underlying fear was that Khrushchev was right when he pulled his shoe off and beat it on the countertop at the UN and said, "We will bury you." Most academics believed he was right. And so they formulated policies designed to get along. and to hopefully foster this sense of don't hate us too much. And Reagan knew better. He knew this was all a bunch of bunk. He knew our system was superior, and he knew that we could not be defeated if we put together the right plan and the right effort. We've got a question.
That reminds me, and you could comment on this. Conventional wisdom is another word for the mass media. It just seemed that the mass media hammered him on a regular basis and all his policies. Could you comment on that?
Absolutely. Again, everything he did, he was the dummy. He was simple-minded. It wasn't just enough that he was wrong, he was stupid. That's how they dealt with him. And yet we know that's not true. What's interesting is it never seemed to impact the American people. At some point, the media that's what that headline on Time magazine, why is this man so popular? How can it be? We've been telling you what a complete loser he is for so long. Why don't you believe us? And the answer is because we had our own evidence. And you can whisper in my ear all you want that if someone stands there and tells you, yeah, George Landrith is Mr. Universe, you go, yeah, no, I can tell he's not. I'm sitting there looking at him. That's not Mr. Universe. It's not near, he's not busted out of a suit. So you wouldn't believe, and if someone could tell you all day long, I'm Mr. Universe, and I could stand here, I'm Mr. Universe. I really am. I'm Mr. Universe. I'm Mr. Universe. You're just not, you're going to go, he's lying to me. And that's what the public did. They just essentially tuned the media out. And that was the beginning of when the public began to distrust the mainstream media. You remember that there was a time when the media was very well respected. Walter Cronkite, who's actually quite liberal, was very well respected. And it wasn't long hereafter that they became not respected. And it was because they were lying to us every single night, telling us that something that we could visibly see was not true, and acting as if it was truth. And it may have convinced a few weak-minded people, the people that are susceptible to these are not the droids you're looking for. But for the rest of us who could observe and think, we knew that they were full of it, and we moved along. But I love his plan was obviously more complex than this, but he said, we win, they lose. And he had, like I said, he understood it was about morality, it was about missile defense, it was about building a strong military, it was about building a strong economy. And he did all of that. And he undermined the Soviets economically, morally. That's why he understood. His goal was to strengthen us and to point out their immorality. That's why he called them the evil empire. That's why he went after them, to take out from them those sorts of things. Because it was a very complex strategy. He was playing 3D chess, and you got the Washington Post saying he's got nothing in between his ears. Okay? And who's the dummy? All right. Well, of course, these are results that, as I just said, nobody could have foreseen. I didn't foresee this happening, and it just happened almost overnight. Stunning kind of event. It happened in his lifetime. I think people thought that when he was, that this was a long-term plan, that he began the slow, long process of defeating Soviet communism. It happened in his lifetime. At any rate, so to me, now what's amazing to me is there in Eastern Europe and around the world, there's memorials and plazas and statues erected to Ronald Reagan. I don't know if you know that or not, but there are. I'm going to show you a couple of them. Right here, this one is in Hungary. You see right there? His signature. That's in Freedom Square. Recently named Freedom Square in Hungary. Statue of Ronald Reagan. Correct. And then this is the Czech Republic. I've named a street for him, Ronald Reagan Way. I hope you can make that out. Of course, it's in Czech, so they've added a few extra letters there, but that's Ronald Reagan, and that's in the Czech Republic, an avenue named after our president. And then this, of course, is in London. So, and those aren't the only ones, but I didn't want to necessarily waste all your time with pictures of things in Europe. But the bottom line is, these are people who view him as a liberator. They don't view him as a Republican or a Democrat or a conservative or whatever. He was a champion of freedom, and he helped them win their freedom, and he inspired them to win their freedom, and they love him for it. So, the last thing I kind of want to point out here is that Reagan was popular because he was right. He was not right because he was popular. And that's an important lesson. I just want to point out, Lyndon Johnson didn't even seek re-election in 1968. Nixon was forced to resign. This is important because I want you to understand how unusual his presidency was. Gerald Ford could not win an election. He became president through means other than a national election. Jimmy Carter could not win re-election. George H.W. Bush could not win re-election. William Jefferson Clinton won re-election, but he never got 50% of the vote, ever. George W. Bush did win re-election twice in two very, very tight elections. Essentially, 50-50 elections. And of course, Barack Obama is the only president who was re-elected but won fewer popular votes and fewer electoral votes in his second term than he did his first. That's never, anybody who won a second term always did better their second term. They didn't do worse. And that's it. So, National Geographic did a poll. They asked Americans, in an election between Ronald Reagan and Barack Obama, who would you vote for? Ronald Reagan won more than he would have won in 1980, his landslide victory in 1980. Nearly 60% of the vote. And remarkably, in the demographic from 18 to 34, people who were not alive when he was president, people who did not know him as president, could have no recollection of him, he won with that group, and that's the group that powered Barack Obama to the presidency. And they would vote for Ronald Reagan. Again, Ronald Reagan was not great because he was popular. He was popular because he was great. And he was popular because he was right. And I think that's important. Truth is powerful. And I think too often, see, he understood in politics, he understood that good policy, being right, actually makes for good politics. And too many politicians spend their time trying to figure out, look at the polls and figure out what will get me a bump in today's discussion on the evening news. And they don't just say, if I do the right thing, good things flow from that. Now, the media tells you that's simplistic. I would just say it's an eternal truth. You can't get around it. It's not simplistic. It just is. It's like gravity. At any rate, I just want to conclude as I began, because I think this is the essence of Ronald Reagan. It captures so much of what he was about.
I wasn't a great communicator, but I communicated great things, and they didn't spring full bloom from my brow. They came from the heart of a great nation, from our experience, our wisdom, and our belief in the principles that have guided us for 2 centuries.
I love that, because it encapsulates so much of what I've talked about here tonight. So, now the question is, what can we do about Reagan? It's great that Reagan was great. What I hope we do is that we learn from his example. I think we have to make sure that we're always communicating great things. You guys are conservatives. You guys are actually very influential. So when you're talking to your friends, communicate great things. Don't communicate small things about conservatism. Go to the big things. Like I said, what are the small things about conservatives that we can run things a little more efficiently than they can? What are the big things? The big things are that we can provide opportunity for millions of Americans. That they can have a better life and a better hope. That they can provide for their children's future. That they can have freedom and opportunity. I mean, these are big things. When you have a chance to give an A answer, don't give them your C answer. Give them your A answer. That's what Ronald Reagan did. He gave them the A answer every time. Be fluent in the principles of freedom. And if you don't feel like you understand them 100%, you in your gut get them, but you're not sure you can articulate them, that's okay. You can work on that, because you do get them in your gut. That's why you're a conservative. But you can get it. And then lastly, remember why freedom matters. It's a little bit like the concept of, always give them, the great things. But we're conservatives for a reason. It's not just because we think that we're better than, the other party, or that, we have, our logo's cooler, or it's about big ideas. It's very important. I would argue it's the sort of stuff, I don't know that, I'm going to go out on a limb here. I do not believe that God is indifferent as to the condition that his children live in. I think he's on the side of freedom. I think that's why at certain times in the Revolutionary War, you have George Washington talking about divine providence and odd circumstances that led to victories that should have not been victories. And times when defeats would have been crushing, but somehow some event, some storm, some fog, some other thing happened that allowed his little army to escape a disaster. I don't think God's indifferent. Now, I don't know that he plays a part in politics, but he is not indifferent to the condition that his children lived in. And that's why Ronald Reagan didn't talk so much about politics. He talked about principles that matter. And we need to do the same thing. And we need to lift people and be optimistic. And as we do that, the truth is, we will be able to win over America in a way that will be incredible. And you will see landslide victories for us, because these principles are timeless. else. Americans understand this stuff. They just want somebody who can speak it fluently to them. Too often the candidates look like they can't speak it fluently. They look like it's a second language. And they look like they have to read it off a teleprompter because it's not really coming from their heart. So it's not convincing. So we need to do that, and then we need to seek out leaders like that, but ultimately it begins with us. You know, in America, if we don't like what's going on, the truth is we got to look inward. It's us, because we're where it all starts. I want to thank you for your commitment to freedom. I know that you had a lot of things you could be doing tonight. You could have been in many places tonight. You could have been home in your jammies relaxing, and instead you're here tonight listening to me drone on, and I appreciate that, though, because freedom is worth fighting for, and it's important. And too many people think it's perhaps too difficult, they're worried that they can't make a difference. So I appreciate you being here. I just want to encourage you to invite more of your friends to be involved and to be that great communicator, that great persuader, and have America have this great resurgence as we resurge back to these principles, timeless principles, that will make America the great and wonderful place that we all know it is, and it can achieve the greatness that we know it should achieve. And I leave that with you, and just again, with a word of thanks for you being here and for your commitment, because the price of freedom is truly eternal vigilance, and I appreciate your vigilance. So thank you so much.